Revision session on our embryology. So now we are in our second part, starting with development of foregut. So it's a part nothing but GIT. We know GIT is divided into foregut, midgut, hindgut. So this is development of foregut video. So first we'll start with the diagram so that we can understand. So in the 3 weeks the embryo looks like this. We have amnion, allantois, connecting stalk, allantoic blood vessels, yolk sac, and in the 4th week the embryo looks like this. The vitellointestinal duct, or also called as omphallomesenteric duct, also develops, and yolk sac, umbilical arteries, umbilical collar, allantois, and by 5th week what happens is our GI forms, that is gastrointestinal system forms, and the part which is back of this allantois diverticulum is called as cloaca, and this is the omphallomesenteric duct, that is vitellointestinal duct, now in the 5th week of embryo. But before, if you see, it's over here. Now it has come to the original position. Now let's start and remember that as I'm saying, these tubes, all this are mainly formed, GIT is mainly formed from endoderm. So gut tube epithelium is mainly derived from the endoderm of the yolk sac. So as I said, we have foregut, midgut, hindgut. Now let us see their arteries, blood supply, sympathetic supply, parasympathetic supply, all those things. So foregut. Foregut lies up to the second part of the duodenum, that is up to ampulla of Vater. It is called as foregut, and the artery is celiac trunk, and sympathetic supply is by greatest splanchnic nerve, that is from T5 to T9, and the parasympathetic supply is by vagus nerve. Now midgut is up to transverse colon, that is right 2/3, and the superior mesenteric artery is supplying it blood, and sympathetic supplies by lesser splanchnic nerve, mainly T10 to T11, and parasympathetic supplies by vagus nerve. Now the hindgut, it is the rest of the gut till the anal canal is called as hindgut. So it is supplied by inferior mesenteric artery, and the sympathetic supply is by least splanchnic nerve, that is T12, and also by the lumbar splanchnic nerve L1 and L2. And the parasympathetic supply is done by S2, S3, S4, that is also called as nervi ergens. So the pain fibers, as we study the sympathetic supply, so mainly the pain fibers are carried by the sympathetic fibers, and appendix is also a part of midgut, that is supplied by T10 to T11. And the umbilicus is at the level of L3 to L4, and its dermatome is T10, and mainly in appendicitis the referred pain is in the umbilical area due to the common dermatome and the same segmental innervation. So actually this is the umbilical dermatome. So in appendicitis actually the pain can be seen in the umbilicus because of its T10 dermatome, because of same dermatome. And contents of umbilical cord. So what are the contents may be? Right and left umbilical artery, of course, it has vessels, umbilical artery, and 2 umbilical arteries, 1 umbilical vein, because right one degenerates, and we have vitellointestinal duct, and also we have our allantois and Wharton's jelly. So these are the contents of our umbilical cord. Now let us see the development of foregut. So start our development. So actually foregut give rise to many diverticulum, like respiratory diverticulum, hepatic bud, which forms the liver, ventral pancreatic bud, and dorsal pancreatic bud, both together form the pancreas, and also the laryngotracheal diverticulum is the first sign of respiratory system development. So whenever we see the laryngotracheal diverticulum, we can confirm that the respiratory system is going to form in an embryo. So next we have the esophagus. So how esophagus develops? So mainly esophagus is separated from the trachea by the tracheoesophageal septum, and this tracheoesophageal fold is mainly deviated posteriorly, and it forms a esophageal atresia. So the fetus is now unable to swallow because of this atresia, and it is causing the polyhydramnios. So polyhydramnios is mainly caused by separation of trachea by the tracheoesophageal septum. And next, the tracheoesophageal ridges are nothing but the longitudinal ridges that eventually fuse to separate the trachea from the esophagus. So the trachea and esophagus are separated from each other by the tracheoesophageal ridges. So by this diagram we'll try to understand. So this is the trachea, this is the esophageal ridge. So this middle is the tracheoesophageal ridge. It separates it so that both can form the 2 separate tubes. Later what happens is that lung buds are also formed from the trachea. So this is how the trachea separate from the esophagus. So this is the trachea, and the remaining part back you can see the tube-like structure is nothing but our esophagus. And this is the respiratory diverticulum. This part is the respiratory diverticulum. And next let us move on to the lusorian artery. So lusorian artery is nothing but the abnormal right subclavian artery which goes behind the esophagus and mainly compresses the esophagus, causing a dysphagia. Dysphagia means unable to eat properly. So dysphagia lusoria, because it is caused by lusorial artery, so the name is dysphagia lusoria. Next, let us see the development of stomach. So actually stomach rotates 2 times in the clockwise direction, that is 90 degrees. So remember, stomach rotates 2 times, that too in the clockwise direction. So the first rotation is in the ventral axis, vertical axis, vertical means like this. In the vertical axis, that is the anterior border becomes the right border. Anterior border becomes the right border and the posterior border becomes the left border. So the left border grow rapidly and becomes superficial. The right border grows slowly and become more posterior. So we know we have our left vagus and right vagus. So left vagus is becoming superficial, that is anterior vagal trunk now. And the right vagus is posterior vagal trunk. So the second rotation is nothing but in the anterior posterior axis. So the upper end becomes the cardiac end and it becomes towards the left side, and the lower end is towards the pylorus and becomes the right side. So this thing actually we already described detail in our explanation. So this is a revision video, so it's just not explaining this, very simple process. So next let us move on to the hypertrophic pyloric stenosis. So this is a clinical condition where the muscularis externa in the pyloric part undergoes the hypertrophy, and there is a palpable mass in the right costal margin which mainly obstructs the lumen and also causes projectile vomiting immediately after feeding in a small baby. And next, peritoneal folds of stomach. You know we have ventral mesogastrium, dorsal mesogastrium. So ventral mesogastrium have mainly what kind of structures? You can remember like lesser fact. L is for lesser is for lesser omentum, and F is for FA is for falciform ligament, and C is for coronary ligament, and T is for triangular ligament. So the dorsal mesogastrium mainly give rise to gastrosplenic ligament, linorenal ligament, gastrophrenic ligament, and greater omentum. So gastrosplenic ligament is between the stomach and the spleen, linorenal ligament is between the spleen and the kidney, and the gastrophrenic is between the stomach and the diaphragm, and the greater omentum is below the stomach. So these are all the structures derived from the dorsal mesogastrium. Now we will move on to our duodenum and liver. So duodenum and liver are mainly derived from the foregut and midgut. First we will see the duodenum. So duodenum is mainly derived from foregut and also midgut. So it's mainly supplied by both celiac trunk and also superior mesenteric, because you know celiac trunk supplies the foregut and midgut is supplied by a superior mesenteric. So both take part in supplying a duodenum. And during the rotation of the stomach, even duodenum comes to the right side and it forms a C-shaped loop. So what is mesoduodenum? Actually this duodenum lies it suspends the duodenum from the posterior abdominal wall, that is the mesoduodenum. It disappears, the duodenum becomes a and the duodenum becomes a retroperitoneal. So retroperitoneal means only some part of the organ is lined by the peritoneal cavity. So here the mesoduodenum, as it disappears, only it becomes some part is lined, so it becomes retroperitoneal. So our duodenum is retroperitoneal. So duodenum retroperitoneal except at the first proximal part of the duodenum. This is an exception to remember. And actually duodenum, next let us move on to liver. So that's it about duodenum. So liver is mainly developed from the two sources, that is the liver bud and the septum transversum. Note that here the liver bud is of endodermal origin, because liver bud also arises exactly at the junction of foregut and midgut, that is from the duodenum, and the septal transversum is actually in mesodermal origin. So our liver is of mesodermal and also endodermal origin. So liver bud in the foregut tube forms the parenchyma of the liver and also forms a biliary system, whereas the septum transversum forms mainly the connective tissue of the liver, capsule of the liver, sinusoids, Kupffer cells. So all these are formed from the septum transversum. So now let us move on to the development of pancreas. So pancreas also have two parts, the dorsal pancreatic, ventral pancreatic. Remember these both are endodermal because they are formed from the GIT tube. So dorsal pancreatic bud mainly forms the entire part of the pancreas mainly, and the ventral pancreatic bud mainly moves dorsally and lie below the dorsal bud, and this mainly it takes the part in the formation of head of the pancreas and also in the unicinnate process. So the main pancreatic duct derived from the distal part of the dorsal bud and also whole of the ventral bud. So we have ducts like so by this diagram we'll try to understand. So actually the main pancreatic duct is a duct which comes like this from the distal part of a dorsal bud, and also it comes like this anastomosing with a ventral part of a whole part of a duct. So this is how our main pancreatic duct is derived, mainly from the distal part of the dorsal bud and also whole part of our ventral bud. Now let us move on to the common bile duct. So actually common bile duct communicate with the pancreatic bud to form the ampulla of water, and it drains out in the major papilla. So common bile duct, this is a common bile duct. It is associated with the pancreatic bud and opens into the ampulla of water at the major duodenal papilla. And we also have the accessory pancreatic duct, that is nothing but, you can see here, this is a major pancreatic duct, right? The remaining part is the accessory pancreatic duct, which mainly opens into the minor duodenal papilla. So it is from the, actually this accessory pancreatic duct is from the proximal part of the dorsal duct. That's it. And next, the most common anomaly seen in the development of pancreas is the pancreatic divisum. So here in the name itself you can understand divisum means here the pancreas are divided. So ventral bud is drained mainly by the ventral duct and open into the major duodenal papilla, and the dorsal bud is mainly drained by the dorsal duct and it opens into the minor duodenal papilla. So pancreas may also consist two lobes, that is, if the lobes migrate around the duodenum in opposite direction and mainly forming a fuse with the dorsal pancreatic bud and forming an annular pancreas. So annular pancreas is nothing but our pancreas only. We know this ventral bud should come here, but instead they just turn around the duodenum and obstruct the duodenum. This is called as annulus pancreas. And the bilobed ventral bud forms a ring around the duodenum. One lobe migrates along usual pathway and other migrates along opposite direction. So because as they are moving in opposite direction, one, it is forming a ring like structure. So it is seen as double bubble sign in the X-ray. So X-ray annular pancreas, there is loss of continuity of the duodenum due to the pancreas surrounding that. So this duct shows a double bubble sign. Now we'll start the development of midgut as we have completed a foregut. So midgut is its contents are mainly second part of duodenum, below the opening of ampulla of water, and also third part of duodenum, fourth part of duodenum, jejunum, ileum, cecum, appendix, ascending colon, transverse colon up to right 2/3 part. So left part of transverse colon and all those form the hindgut. So the arterial supply is mainly done by the superior mesenteric artery, and the sympathetic supply is from T10 to T11, that is lesser splanchnic nerves, and the parasympathetic supply is done by the vagus nerve. So actually we have physiological hernia, that is nothing but herniation of the contents of the midgut into the yolk sac through the vitellointestinal duct. So it occurs mainly by the 6th week and it reduces by the 10th week. And the Meckel's diverticulum is nothing but the remnant of the some parts of the vitellointestinal duct, and the size is about 2 inches and the location is 2 feet from the ileocecal valves. And the contents are mainly two types of tissues like gastric and pancreatic tissue, and it is seen in 2% of population. So here everything like 2 2 2, you can remember it, Meckel's diverticulum. Next, coming to the vitelline cyst, the two ends of the vitellointestinal duct forms a fibrous cord with a cyst in the midline. This is known as vitelline cyst, or also known as enterocystoma. And next we have the vitelline fistula. It is the entire vitellointestinal duct is patent. So in this case what happens is there is a communication between the intestine and umbilicus. So because of this reason the fecus can be seen in the umbilicus. This is mainly due to the vitelline fistula. And next the segments of midgut. So midgut is divided into pre-arterial segment and the post-arterial segment. So the pre-arterial segments mainly leads to formation of duodenum, jejunum, ileum, except the terminal part of the ileum. And the post-arterial segments give rise to the terminal part of ileum, appendix, cecum, ascending colon, and also the transverse colon, that will mainly right 2/3, because this is our midgut part. And the rotation of midgut. Actually rotation takes place mainly during the reduction of our physiological hernia, that is in the 10th week. The midgut rotates 3 times, each time by 90 degrees in a counterclockwise or also known as anti-clockwise manner. So if you remember, before we have discussed so if you remember in stomach we said that it rotates in a clockwise direction, but this is reverse in the case of midgut. Midguts undergo the anti-clockwise rotation. And next, coming to the first rotation. So the first rotation is nothing but taking place in the pre-arterial and the post, that is what happens is the pre-arterial segment moves towards the right side and the post-arterial segment moves towards the left side in the first rotation. And in the second rotation, the prearterial segment elongates and enters the abdominal cavity and rotates by the 90 degrees, again anti-clockwise rotation, and the prearterial segments comes to lie behind the superior mesenteric artery now. And third rotation, the post-arterial segment enters the abdominal cavity and rotates by the 90 degrees anti-clockwise direction, and the cecum comes to the right side below the liver, and it is not possible to define colon now because the cecum descend to the right iliac fossa, the cecum bud descend to the right iliac fossa and form the cecum appendix. So these structures are clearly defined or appreciated only when the cecum bud descends into the right iliac fossa. And so final outcome after the rotation of the midgut, you can see this diagram, all the structures. And we have anomalies like gastroschisis and omphalocele. So gastroschisis is nothing but hernia is seen at the weak point, especially the site of regression of the right umbilical vein, and here the sacs are absent and the organs involved are only intestine. But what is omphalocele? Here physiological hernia that fails to reduce. So here the sac is still present and the organs involved are initially intestine is involved, but later any abdominal organ may also take part. So note that intestinal obstruction is most commonly seen in the gastroschisis, and omphalocele is most common associated with the other congenital anomalies. And remember that gastroschisis is not involved in any other congenital anomalies. Now let us see the rotational anomalies of midgut. So if the rotation doesn't take place, that is non-rotation of midgut, then the large intestine may enter the cavity on the left side and the small intestine may enter on the right side. And reverse rotation of the midgut, that is the first rotation may undergo clockwise direction instead of anti-clockwise as we discussed. So it results in the compression of the transverse colon by the superior mesenteric artery. And the mixed rotation of midgut, that is the first and second rotations are normal, but the last rotation is not only taking place. So what could be the features of the mixed rotation? That is, there may be subpyloric cecum and there is Ladd's band cecum, that is cecum to the posterior abdominal wall. It obstructs the duodenum and results in the bile vomiting in a newborn. So if there is bile vomiting in the newborn, if there is subpyloric cecum and there is Ladd's band, then we can confirm it as a mixed rotation of midguts. So in anomalies we have mainly non-rotation of the midgut, and we have our reverse rotation of midgut, and we have the mixed rotation of midgut. So this is all about our revision series of embryology. Now we are in development of our cardiovascular system. So first we need to know where is cardiogenic area to start with. So cardiogenic area is actually derived from the splanchnopubic part of our lateral plate mesoderm. So we know our lateral plate mesoderm is divided into somatic layer and splanchnopubic layer. So that splanchnopubic layer gives rise to cardiogenic area, which is mainly cranial to the oropharyngeal membrane. Oropharyngeal membrane is nothing but it is also called as procaudal membrane. So cranial to procaudal membrane or buccopharyngeal membrane, first we used to have this cardiogenic area. Later, because of this lateral folding, what happens is the cardiogenic area reaches the correct position so that heart forms. So first the heart is in the form of a tube-like structure. You can see this is the heart tube formation. Now let us understand how the heart tube forms. Actually here you can see this first part is called as bulbous chordae. So the dilatations are formed. First we know heart tube has endodermal tube. Two endodermal tubes are formed. They fuse together to form, but the last part you can see they are unfused so that they form the right and left horns. So the starting parts which are fused, which give rise to our first part called as bulbous chordae, and the second part is called as primitive ventricle, and this is called as primitive atrium, and this is called as sinus venosus. Sinus venosus is in turn divided into the body and also horns. It is divided into three parts, that is right and left horns and a body. So bulbous chordae is again further divided into three parts by you can see forming like this intermediate spiral septum. Spiral septum is formed only in our last part in truncus arteriosus. We will discuss it. And this first part, this is called as proximal 1/3 of bulbous cortex. This is called as conus part, and this is called as truncus arteriosus. And the truncus arteriosus is in turn divided by spiral septum into ascending aorta and also our outflow tract, that is pulmonary artery. So once we'll see here bulbous chordae. is a proximal 1/3 will form a rough part of the right ventricle. So now we'll see what forms what. So rough part of right ventricle. So this proximal 1/3 gives rise to right ventricle, and the conus part will form the infundibulum of both right and left ventricle. And infundibulum is nothing with the outflow parts, and the spiral septum is derived from the neural crest cells, is developed in the truncus arteriosus and divides into the aorta and also pulmonary trunk. So aorta and pulmonary trunk are formed from a spiral septum, and the conus part gives rise to formation of infundibulum of both right and left ventricle. And next, the primitive ventricle. So of course, as the name, primitive ventricle gives rise to ventricle, but remember that only it forms a left ventricle, rough part of the left ventricle, but the right ventricle is formed from the proximal 1/3 of the bulbus quadus. So both together form a right and left ventricles. Next, coming to bulboventricular sulcus. So this is actually filled with the septum, which forms the interventricular septum. So interventricular septum is nothing but this is the bulbus quadus, right, and this is the primitive ventricle. In between them we have a bulboventricular sulcus. You can see here this later forms are interventricular septum, because proximal part forms right ventricle and this primitive ventricle form left ventricle. So between those we have the interventricular septum. And next, primitive atrium. Primitive atrium, of course, it forms both side of right and left atrium, rough part of both right and left atrium. Next, coming to sinus venosus. So sinus venosus have body, right, as we discussed, it has body, right and left horns. So let us see. The body is absorbed into the right atrium along with the right horn. So this right horn, this body, this both are absorbed into the right atrium. We know this is left atrium, this right atrium. So this both structures are like this, absorbed into the right atrium. And the left horn obliterates and forms the coronary sinus. So left horn will disappear and it only forms as a coronary sinus. And the right common cardinal vein will form the superior vena cava. So actually this is right horn, this is left horn, as I said. So there are three veins on both sides. So this is the right cardinal vein, right umbilical vein, right vitelline vein, and this is left vitelline vein, left umbilical vein, and left cardinal vein. So left horn digresses, but only left umbilical vein remains, because we know among the right and left umbilical vein only our left umbilical vein remains. So you can see this is the right common cardinal vein, which mainly forms the superior vena cava, and the right vitelline vein will form the inferior vena cava. Especially cranial part of inferior vena cava is formed by the right vitelline vein. And next, let us see the looping of heart. So looping of heart is nothing but now this heart tube is converting into a more adult form by means of like atria comes upper side and ventricles comes lower side. You can see this is due to the dextro looping of atrial chamber, which goes above and behind, and the ventricle chamber moves front and below. So the ventricles now come below and the atrium comes up, as in an adult heart. And next, let us move on to the teratology of Fallot. So actually teratology of Fallot is an anomaly. What happens here is there is pulmonary valve getting narrower, and there is overriding aorta, and also there is ventricular septal defect, and with a thick ventricular wall. So this is caused mainly due to anterior displacement of the spiral septum. We have seen the spiral septum, right? If this spiral septum is displaced anteriorly, then this teratology of Fallot is formed. Mainly it causes a pulmonary stenosis. So here the other anomalies related with this are overriding aorta, right ventricular hypertrophy, ventricular septal defect. So this teratology of Fallot can be dealt in very detail in our pathology. So next, let us see transposition of great vessels. In the name only you can understand, we know what are the great vessels, aorta, pulmonary trunk. So if these are transposition, means they are exchange or change in their structure. Normal orientation is changed. So non-spiral course of spiral septum leads to this. That is, the blood from the right ventricle goes into the aorta. Actually, we know from right ventricle it should go to pulmonary trunk, but here it goes into aorta. And the blood from the left ventricle going to pulmonary trunk, we know it should go to aorta. So this is like opposite. So this is the transposition of great vessels. And next we have the persistence of truncus arteriosus. So we know truncus arteriosus actual spiral septum forms that one, if you remember. So the spiral septum is not formed here due to the non-migration of the neural crest cells, because we know spiral septum should actually form from neural crest cells, but due to non-migration the spiral septum is not formed. So the truncus arteriosus is still persistent.
Now let us see the interarterial septum formation, that is between two atria. Here we said that primitive atrium forms left atrium, right atrium. So between them, how a interatrial septum forms, let us understand. So first we have the SA orifice. SA orifice is nothing but sinoatrial orifice, which is also absorbed into right atrium. If you remember, our right horn, our body of sinus venosus, and also now the SA orifice is also absorbed into the right atrium. So AV orifice. AV orifice means atrioventricular orifice. This is an endocardial cushion or AV cushion which appear at the two ends and join to form a septum intermedium. Actually, AV means this is the ventricle, this is atrium. So in between them we have our AV septum, which forms an interventricular septum. This is actually endocardial cushion. So this later fuse together to form a intermediate septum. Not interventricular, it is intermediate septum. So here you can see the diagram. This is our SA orifice, and towards SA orifice you can see it is formed by a stalk like this. This is called a septum spurium, and on its left side it forms a left venous valve, and on right side it forms a right venous valve, and below here we have the septum intermedium. So next what happens is the right venous valve and the left venous valve join to form the septum spurium. So our septum spurium is mainly formed by the connection between the right venous valve and left venous valve together form the septum spurium. And you can see sinus venosus, this already know. And next the septum primum will appear and grow towards the septum intermedium. So you can see this is the septum primum, now it is going towards the septum intermedium, right? And the gap between these two is called the ostium primum. So the septum intermedium is growing towards the septum intermedium, and in between them you can see a gap. This is called as ostium primum. And next the septum primum fuses with the septum intermedium. Ostium primum is also called, but the septum primer breaks in the middle in the upper part, and that is called as ostium secundum. So actually what happens is this grows and now it closes this ostium primum, but again in the middle of here upper part one more hole like structure form. It is called as ostium secundum. We'll see in this diagram. So here you can see ostium secundum. So now it is fused, but again one gap is formed in the septum primum itself, that is called as ostium secundum. So the septum secundum also grow till the lower level of the ostium secundum, and the septum secundum is rigid because the left venous valve and also the septum spurium fuse with the septum secundum, whereas the septum primum is flap like because nothing is attached to it, right? So the septum primum leads to formation of fossa ovalis, and septum secundum leads to formation of limba fossa ovalis. These are the adult remnants, that is after birth. These are not in infant, that is after birth. So you can see this is the ostium secundum. So later what happens is septum primum, septum secundum also start growing, but here also there is a gap between it. And this is the left atrium, right atrium, this is the septum intermedium. So now adult remnants form limbus fossa ovalis from the septum secundum, and our ostium secundum only now the space between this septum secundum and ostium secundum now forms the fossa ovalis in adults. So this is all about how interatrial septum forms. Now let's move on to interventricular septum, between two ventricles how the septum forms. So you can see this is a spiral septum. If you remember in our truncus arteriosus, this is the bulbar septum, that is in our bulbus conus, right? And actually bulbar septum, if you remember, it's between our bulbus conus and our primitive ventricle, right? And this is our interventricular septum. Now how this forms, and it's a proliferation of AV cushions. It forms a septum intermedium, right? So in a B structure you can see this is a spiral septum, proliferation of AV cushions and interventricular septum. So this is pulmonary trunk. Here pulmonary trunk forms, here aorta forms from the truncus arteriosus. So this is the outflow part of our left ventricle from the conus, and the trabeculated part of the left ventricle from the primitive ventricle. So now we'll see how those structures. Actually, our interventricular septum has three main parts, that is our muscular part, membranous part and bulbar part. For example, if you think this is an interventricular septum, this lower one, this is called as muscular part, and this upper one is called as membranous part, and more upper one is called as bulbar part. Now let us see the muscular part, how it forms. So the muscular part mainly forms from the muscular proliferation of bulboventricular cavity. So this is what leads to formation of muscular part, and the membranous part is derived from the proliferation of AV cushions, and the bulbar part is derived from the spiral septum. So the proximal 1/3 of bulbous cord is, that is right ventricle, and the primitive ventricle, left ventricle, proximal 1/3 of bulbous cord forms right ventricle, and the primitive ventricle forms left ventricle. So this is nothing but going to rise to the common ventricular chamber. So that's it about this. Now let us move on to like development of veins, how the veins are developed, different kinds of veins. So actually this development of veins start by end of the 5th week, that is the we have mainly this major kinds of veins like vitelline vein, umbilical vein, common cardinal vein, anterior cardinal vein. So this common cardinal vein is formed by the fusion of anterior cardinal vein and posterior cardinal vein. So in this diagram we can easily understand this is the right, and actually they are further divided in right and left side according to sides. So this is the anterior cardinal vein, this is the posterior cardinal vein, together both fuse and form the common cardinal vein. This is the umbilical vein, this is the vitelline vein, and of course these are again divided into right and left side according to these sides. And this is the primordial atrium, this is the left horn, and the right venous sinus venosus. So now let us see how they are formed. So the vitelline vein mainly carries the blood from the yolk sac into the sinus venosus, and the umbilical vein mainly carries the oxygenated blood from the placenta to the sinus venosus. So actually veins should carry the oxygenated blood, but it is in the case of fetal life it is reverse in case of umbilical veins and umbilical arteries. And the common cardinal vein mainly drains from the embryo proper into sinus venosus, and the anterior cardinal vein drains the upper part of the body to the sinus venosus. Posterior cardinal veins drains the lower part of the body to the sinus venosus. So however, whatever the vein, they bring the blood finally to our sinus venosus, because there only the horns are attached and there only these veins are also attached. Now let us see particularly how vitelline veins forms all those things. So vitelline vein mainly forms a plexus anastomosis around the duodenum. So you can see this is the duodenum, and around the duodenum the anastomosis are formed, and the proximal ventral anastomosis and the dorsal anastomosis, distal ventral anastomosis. So these are the different kinds of anastomosis formed by the vitelline vein. So this plexus mainly pass by the septum transversum and drains into the right and left horn of the sinus venosus. So remember that they pass by the septum transversum, vitelline vein pass by the septum transversum. Septum transversum gives rise to our liver and also our diaphragm, right? So it passes by the septum transversum and drain into the left and right horn of the sinus venosus. So the vitelline vein in the liver, as it passes through the liver also, it forms the sinusoids, and the hepatocardiac channels are the vitelline vein hepatocardiac channels. Vitelline vein distal to the septum transversum forms the hepatocardiac channels, and the right hepatocardiac channel mainly forms the cranial part of a IVC. And let's move on to the umbilical vein. So umbilical vein, actually we know the right umbilical vein degenerates, and the gastroschisis is the part where the hernia is seen at the site of regression of the right umbilical vein. In the left umbilical vein, only the source of oxygenated blood and drains into the left horn of the sinus venosus. So the part of the left umbilical vein distal to the septum transversum gets obliterated. And ductus venosus is the only source to shunt the blood from the left umbilical vein now, because left umbilical vein actually joins with our portal vein and it reaches the blood to the inferior vena cava by means of only ductus venosus. So ductus venosus shunt from the left umbilical vein to the right hepatocardiac channel. So after the formation of portal vein, the left branch of portal vein connects to the IVC mainly via the ductus venosus. So next, common cardinal vein. Common cardinal veins in turn give rise to many veins like subclavian vein, internal jugular vein, right brachiocephalic vein, left brachiocephalic vein, even superior vena cava. So let us see subclavian vein. It is derived from the intersegmental veins and also drains into the anterior cardinal veins and drains the upper and lower limb bud. And the internal jugular vein is derived from the anterior cardinal vein above the subclavian vein opening. So you can say this is a subclavian vein opening. Above the subclavian opening we have here anterior cardinal vein. So this leads to formation of internal jugular vein. And the right brachiocephalic vein is derived from the right anterior cardinal vein. You can see here right anterior cardinal vein, which is mainly present between the right subclavian vein opening and also oblique anastomosis opening. So you can see it is exactly between them, the right anterior cardinal vein. And the left brachiocephalic vein, it is mainly derived from the oblique anastomosis and also from the left anterior cardinal vein. You can see this is the oblique anastomosis and left anterior cardinal vein. So these two give rise to left brachiocephalic vein, and this is present mainly between the left subclavian vein opening and also oblique anastomosis opening. So the left anterior cardinal vein present below the oblique anastomosis disappear and disintegrate. So the left side, as we said, it disappear and disintegrates. Superior vena cava is derived from the right anterior cardinal vein below the oblique anastomosis and right common cardinal vein. Here you can see this is a right common cardinal vein. It's here. Next we have like a condition like a double SVC, like a double superior vena cava. It occurs due to the persistence of left anterior cardinal vein. Actually we know it need to degenerate, but if it persists, then especially below or oblique anastomosis, and there is also no oblique anastomosis formation. So the right SVC open, if both are present, then the right SVC open into the right atrium and the left SVC mainly open into the coronary sinus, because we know left horn degenerate and form the coronary sinus. So the double SVC, the communicating brachiocephalic vein between the two anterior cardinals, has failed to develop in the dorsal view. So now let us see the portal vein formation. So it is mainly formed from the two ventral anastomosis and one dorsal anastomosis. So you can see these are the two ventral anastomosis and this dotted line is the dorsal anastomosis. So the splenic vein mainly joins at the dorsal anastomosis. Here the splenic vein is joined, and the left umbilical vein joins at the proximal ventral anastomosis. So the proximal ventral anastomosis, here the left umbilical vein joins. The superior mesenteric vein is derived from the left vitelline vein between the dorsal anastomosis and distal ventral anastomosis. Distal to ventral anastomosis and the dorsal anastomosis, our superior mesenteric vein is derived, and the portal vein is mainly formed by the two structures, that is by dorsal anastomosis and also by the right vitelline vein, which is present between the proximal ventral anastomosis and dorsal anastomosis, and a right branch of portal vein is derived from the right vitelline vein distal to the proximal ventral anastomosis. So once if you check out this diagram, you can easily understand. And the left branch of portal vein is derived from the proximal ventral anastomosis, and left vitelline vein is distal to the proximal ventral anastomosis. So now let us see how IVC is derived from. So IVC is divided into parts. Like first part is derived from the right posterior cardinal vein, and between that is present between the transverse anastomosis and caudal opening of, you can see this is a transverse anastomosis and caudal opening of right supracardinal vein. So you can see these are the supracardinal veins. These are subcardinal veins, these are supracardinal veins, and these are cardinal veins, right posterior cardinal vein and the left posterior cardinal vein. This is a transverse anastomosis. This is also known as sacrocardinal vein. And the second part is derived from the right supracardinal vein. Third part is derived from the anastomosis between right supracardinal and subcardinal vein. Fourth part is derived from right subcardinal vein. Fifth part from anastomosis between right subcardinal and right hepatocardiac channel. This is hepatocardiac channel. Sixth part is derived from the right hepatocardiac channel. So next let us see renal vein. So renal vein, right renal vein derived from right mesonephric vein, left renal vein derived from left mesonephric vein along with left subcardinal vein, and also with anastomosis of two right subcardinal veins. Right renal vein is larger when compared with left renal vein is larger when compared with right renal vein, and the left suprarenal vein and the left gonadal vein mainly drain into the renal vein. So you can see this is the gonadal vein and suprarenal vein, left suprarenal vein. So as we discussed already, double SVC, so like that we also have double IVC. It occurs mainly due to the persistence of left sacrocardinal vein, because they need to regenerate if they are present. It is greater than subcardinal vein and also supracardinal vein. So you can see this hepatic segment of IVC, renal segment, persistence of left sacrocardinal vein, it leads to mainly formation of double IVC. Out the development of pharyngeal arch arteries. So we have aortic arches. Aortic sac is a cranial part of truncus arteriosus, and the first actually we have 6 arches, but the fifth one degenerate. So the first arch artery mainly disappears and leaves its remnant. One for maximum, so maxillary artery. Two second, so say stapedial artery. This also disappears and leaves. But the arch of aorta is mainly derived from the left horn of aortic sac. Left fourth arch artery, left dorsal aorta, caudal part. And the brachiocephalic trunk is derived from right horn of aortic sac. Common carotid artery is derived from third arch artery, proximal part. Internal carotid artery derived from third arch artery, distal part, and dorsal aorta, cranial part. And our external carotid artery derived from carotid bud. Pulmonary artery derived from sixth arch artery, proximal part. Ductus arteriosus is derived from sixth arch artery, distal part. In the formation of subclavian vein, we have right subclavian artery from the right fourth arch artery, right dorsal aorta, cranial to seventh cervical intersegmental artery, and also from the right seventh cervical intersegmental artery. The next, abnormal right subclavian artery, or also called as Lusorian artery. It is due to formed from the right fourth arch artery and also right dorsal aorta, cranial to the seventh cervical intersegmental artery, and disappears. So right seventh cervical intersegmental artery and the right dorsal aorta, caudal to the seventh cervical intersegmental artery persist. 1 and 2 are absent and 3 and 4 persist. And abnormal right subclavian artery which passes behind the esophagus and compress it, causing dysphagia. This condition is mainly called as dysphagia lusoria because it is caused by lusoria, that is right subclavian artery. Know that right fourth arch artery forms right subclavian artery, but the same fourth arch artery on left side which forms the arch of aorta. So summary of aortic arches is like first arch artery disappear from maxillary artery, second arch artery disappear from stapedial artery, third arch artery forms common carotid artery, external carotid, internal carotid arteries. Fourth arch artery form right subclavian artery on right side, whereas arch of aorta on left side. Sixth arch artery from its proximal part forms a pulmonary artery, and from its distal part on the left side mainly it forms a ductus arteriosus. So the double aortic arch, normally right dorsal aorta, its caudal part should disappear, but if it persists, but in double aortic arch both sides of dorsal aorta, that is caudal part, persists and mainly forms a vascular ring around the trachea and also esophagus. This is called as double aortic arch. And ductus arteriosus, we know it is mainly derived from the left sixth arch artery, if you remember here, right. So it connects the left pulmonary artery to arch of aorta. Normally it closes within 10 to 15 hours after the birth, but if it is persistent, then it is called as PDA, persistent ductal arteriosus, so leading to the failure of closing of ductus arteriosus. So it is mainly leading to asynotic heart disease. So we also have other heart diseases which are cyanotic heart diseases like teratology of Fowler's, transposition of great vessels, and also our patent truncus arteriosus may lead to cyanotic heart disease. But remember that PDA, that is patent ductus arteriosus, is acyanotic heart disease. And arch of aorta is mainly formed from the left horn of aortic sac along with the left fourth arch aortic arch artery and left dorsal aorta, caudal part. So now let us start fetal circulation pathway. We know all this already we completed, so this is a quick revision part. So we know we'll start our fetal circulation with placenta. Placenta pump oxygenated blood via left umbilical vein into the liver, into the IVC. We know from left umbilical vein directly into the IVC by means of a shunt, ductus venosus. Next the blood enters into the right atrium, not only from IVC, also we know from SVC. So from right atrium by means of foramen ovale, as is fetal circulation, we know foramen ovale is still present, so it enters into left atrium. From left atrium into left ventricle, from left ventricle into aorta, we know this till here. If some of the blood goes from right atrium to right ventricle, then it goes into pulmonary trunk. Again from pulmonary trunk to aorta, we have our shunting system, that is ductus arteriosus. So from aorta into common iliac artery, from common iliac artery into umbilical artery, and finally from umbilical artery again into placenta. And from right ventricle it may also go to pulmonary trunk, as we said. It takes a shunt here. So it goes to umbilical artery and finally coming to placenta. So this is how the pathway going on in fetal circulation. So our last part is changes of the birth and derived remnants. So we know there is closure of umbilical artery, closure of ductus venosus, umbilical vein, so closure of ductus arteriosus, so all the shunting system, everything is closed. So what are those remnants? Let us see. Closure of umbilical artery, then the remnants are proximal part forms the superior vesical artery, distal part forms the medial umbilical artery, and the closure of ductus venosus and umbilical vein. We know when ductus venosus is closed, it leads to formation of our ligamentum venosum, and when umbilical vein close, it forms ligamentum teres, and when ductus arteriosus close, it may persist as patent ductus arteriosus, and closure of foramen vein, we know septum primum forms the fossa avalis, septum secundum forms the limba fossa avalis. And we'll see some important timeline for the closure of various structures. You know here ductus venosus, functional closure after removal of placenta, anatomical closure on 7th day. Foramen ovale immediately after birth, that is the first breath, leads to functional closure, and the anatomical closure from 4th month to 1 year. And the ductus arteriosus, functional closure 10 to 15 hours after the birth, and anatomical closure 10 to 21 days. So the lateral umbilical fold, so all these folds are remnants in an adult. We can see after umbilical vein and all those cord or everything is removed. So lateral umbilical fold is due to the inferior epigastric artery. Medial umbilical fold due to the distal part of obliterated umbilical artery, and the median umbilical fold is due to the urachus. So here remember it's N, here L, median means arachus due to arachus, medial means due to distal part of obliterated umbilical artery. So this is all about a quick revision of our embryology, whole complete embryology part 2. So if you like our videos, don't forget to like, share and subscribe.
Back to our channel now, as we are continuing the revision series of our embryology. So today we are at development of renal system and hindgut. So let us start with development of kidney. So we know kidney is developed from means intermediate mesoderm, because intermediate mesoderm gives rise to as well as urinary system and also genital system. So it mainly the intermediate mesoderm forms two structures, that is the genital ridge and the nephrogenic cord. So genital ridge, which gives to formation of testis in male and ovary in female, and coming to the nephrogenic cord, which forms the kidneys, mesonephric ducts, paramesonephric duct. Actually paramesonephric duct is just nearer to the mesonephric duct. So as we already discussed in detail of our lesson, so this is just a revision, fast revision series for our NEET PG or next. So it is just again revision. So at the 4th week, the pronephros mainly appear, function as kidney, and they disappear by end of 4th week. So 4th week only arise, 4th week only end. That is about pronephros. And next, by end of 4th week, mesonephros appear, function as an interim kidney, and it stays up to 2 months. And by the 5th week, the metanephros appears and start functioning by 3rd month. So the metanephros mainly forms the excretory component of the kidney, and the diverticula are also arising from the mesonephric duct, which are called as ureteric bud. So this ureteric bud is nothing but which form the metanephric blastema also. So kidney is derived mainly from the two sources, that is the excretory component and the collecting component. So the excretory component is mainly derived from the metanephros, and the collecting component is mainly derived from the ureteric bud. Next, the kidneys become functional from 12th week, and urine is the main component of our amniotic fluid. So for example, in clinical correlation, if there is renal agenesis, then what happens? The amniotic fluid decreases because there is no urine, so it causes the oligohydramnios. And what is this connecting tubule? Connecting tubule is nothing much which connects the distal convoluted tubule from to collecting duct. So it connects the distal convoluting tubule to collecting duct, and this is mainly derived from the metanephros itself. So don't confuse with the connecting tubule and the collecting duct, because collecting duct is derived from ureteric bud, but the connecting tubule is derived from a metanephros like a kidney. And horseshoe kidney is the most common anomaly, that the lower poles of the kidney are fused together. So the kidneys are formed in the, as you know already, kidneys are formed in the pelvis, and they later ascend into the abdomen. This is actually opposite to the testis, because testis first forms in the abdomen and later it ascends to the sacral region. Next, coming to inferior mesenteric artery, what it does, it prevents the ascent of kidney in the case of horseshoe. So normal kidney ascends, but our horseshoe shaped kidney can't ascend because of the inferior mesenteric artery, which is preventing its ascent. The next we is having the development of hindgut. So why we are correlating hindgut here, because we'll understand. So the diverticulum arising from the hindgut is mainly called as allantois. So you can see this is an allantois, This is a divertically arising from the hindgut. And the cloaca is a part of the hindgut which is distal to alloys. So this is a cloaca. This is distal to the hindgut. Distal to allantois. And the urorectal septum separates the cloaca and the cloacal membrane. So there is an urorectal septum which separates the cloaca and its cloacal membrane. Here lies the cloacal membrane, right? And the cloaca is divided into primitive urogenital sinus and primitive rectum. So you can see this is a primitive rectum. Here forms a primitive urogenital sinus. And the cloacal membrane divides it into anal membrane and urogenital membrane. So here the cloacal membrane arises and it divides into anal membrane one side and urogenital membrane on the other side. And the primitive rectum mainly forms the rectum, and the anal canal is present up to the pectinate line. Actually, pectinate line forms here. So next, the derivation of upper anal canal. So upper anal canal, as here pectinate line is formed, this is the upper anal canal, this is the lower anal canal. So upper anal canal is derived from the endoderm. So first we'll start the order from here. So upper part of anal canal is mainly in the primitive rectum area, and this is derived from cloaca because this is cloaca, and cloaca is a part of hindgut. So hindgut is derived from gut, and gut is of endodermal origin. So we can say the upper part of anal canal is of endodermal origin. And next, coming to derivative of lower anal canal. So lower anal canal is in the anal pit or proctadium, and this is of ectodermal. So we can say that upper anal canal is of endodermal origin and lower anal canal is of ectodermal origin. So anal membrane is formed at the junction of upper and lower anal canal. So this is also known as anal membrane, and later here the pectinate line forms. So it ruptures by 9th week. Remember that anal membrane rupture at 9th week, and upper and lower anal canal so communicate, of course, if the anal membrane is not between them, so that they can easily communicate. And the pectinate line is formed at the site of formation of anal membrane. As I said, this anal membrane later forms a pectinate line. And the primitive UGS, that is primitive urogenital sinus, is further divided into definitive urogenital sinus and vesico-urethral canal. So this is a urogenital sinus. This is divided into this upper part, you can see vesico-urethral canal, and this is a definitive urogenital sinus. So definitive urogenital sinus is further divided into the pelvic part and the phallic part, and the vesico-urethral canal is mainly forming the bladder. So it is this bladder, this vesico-urethral is from urogenital sinus, this is from cloaca, this is from hindgut, this is from gut tube. So this is mainly forming, this is from the endoderm. So this is of endodermal. As we said here, upper anal canal of endoderm, lower is of ectoderm. So here we are saying the bladder is of endoderm, but except the trigone of bladder, because the trigone of bladder is mesodermal derivative, that is, it is formed due to the absorption of the mesonephric duct. So now let us see the male and female urethra. So the male urethra development mainly takes it is of 3 times, that is prostatic, membranous and penile. So here you can see this is the bladder, this is the prostatic urethra, this is the membranous urethra, and here you can see this is the penile urethra. So there are 3 types of urethra in the male. So the prostatic urethra up to the ejaculatory opening, here ejaculatory opening takes place, is mainly derived, this part is mainly derived from the urethral part of vesicocranial canal. Vesico-urethral canal. If you remember, this is a vesico-urethral canal. So this leads to formation of upper part of male urethra, that is prostatic urethra is from the VUC, and the membranous urethra is here, right? So the membranous urethra below the ejaculatory duct opening is derived from the pelvic part of UGS. Definitive UGS have pelvic part, phallic part, right? So pelvic part gives rise to this. So by this diagram we can understand vesico-urethral gives rise to prostatic urethra, pelvic part of UGS, definitive UGS give rise to membranous urethra, and penile urethra is derived from the phallic part of UGS. So this order you can remember. In the urogenital sinus, if you remember this order, you can understand the male urethra formation. Vesico-urethral give rise to prostatic urethra, membranous urethra formed from the pelvic part of definitive UGS, and phallic part of definitive UGS leads to formation of penile urethra. So let us see about female urethra formation. It is mainly derived from the urethral part of course same vesico-urethral canal, and also from the pelvic part of definitive UGS. So only these 2 are leading to formation of, in the case of female, but in male all these 3 lead to formation of male urethra. So the phallic part of the definitive UGS forms a vestibule in female. So as we said, these 2 parts are forming mainly female urethra. Phallic part also leads to formation of a vestibule in female. Now let us move on to development of gonads. So genotype of male, either male or female, is mainly determined at the time of fertilization itself, and the phenotypic differentiation will start only at the 7th week. So until 6th week the gonads are called as indifferent gonads because there is no differentiation. So up to 6th week they are called as indifferent gonads, that is we can't differentiate the male and female. But the PGC, that is primordial germ cells, reach the gonads at the 5th week. So gonads is nothing but the testis. The testis develops at 7th week and the ovary develops at 8th to 10th week. So first the testis is only forming in the case of baby, and later ovary develops. Of course, in male testis forms, in female ovary forms. And external genitalia, but in external genitalia the female genitalia are formed first, because in females they are formed at 11th week, in male they are formed at 14th week. This is very important point to differentiate between when the gonads are formed, when the genitalia are formed. So in gonads, male gonads only form first, but coming to genitalia, female genitalia form first. And sex determination can be done at the 15th week, but it is illegal to reveal. And the male development factors are mainly by SRY gene, that is which will stimulate the TDF factor. What is this? That is a testis determining factor. So this testis determining factor produce two types of cells, that is Sertoli cells and Leydig cells. We know Leydig cells mainly give rise to testosterone, and Sertoli cells form MIF. What is this? That is Mullerian inhibiting factor, that is paramesonephric duct is inhibited, because we know paramesonephric duct form female parts, that is female urinary system, genital system. So if it is inhibited, then we can say this is leading to formation of male baby. And the PGC cells reach the gonads, whether it is male or female, they reach at the 5th week of gonads. And the germinal epithelium proliferate and form the sex cords. These sex cords reach deep into the medulla and later form the medullary cords. So these medullary cords are further divided, like they may be canalized or they may be non-canalized. If they are non-canalized, they form Sertoli cells along with Leydig cells, as we discussed before. And if they are canalized, they form the seminiferous tubules, because tubules are like canals, means they are canalized. Now let us see the structures, male derivative and female derivatives. So gonadal ridge mainly forms testis in the case of male and ovary in the case of female, and the tubercle mainly forms the penis in male and clitoris in female, and the swellings form the scrotum in male and labia majora in female. Mesonephros form the efferent tubules or aberrant tubules in male, and hypoopheron, paraooperon in female. Mesonephric duct, also called as Wolffian duct, which leads to formation of appendix of epididymis, vas deferens, epididymis, ejaculatory duct, seminal vesicle. But in a female, it forms appendix of ovary and also Gartner's duct. And coming to the paramesonephric duct, that is Mullerian duct, which leads to formation of appendix of testis, prostatic utricle in male, and fallopian tube, uterus, vagina, upper part in the case of female. And the genital fold, which leads to formation of ventral aspect of penis in case of male, and in female it forms a labia minora. So let us see the female system development. It is mainly we know the paramesonephric ducts are fused to form middle uterovaginal canal, and we also know that unfused part mainly form the fallopian tube, and uterus and vagina are mainly derived from this uterovaginal canal, and especially vagina is derived from the uterovaginal canal upper part, that is coming from the paramesonephric duct, that is mesodermal in origin. So it is also the vagina is also developed from the urogenital sinus in the lower part by cloaca. Of course, cloaca is from hindgut. So hindgut is derived from gut, and gut is of endodermal in origin. So here the main question is, the vagina is developed from the uterovaginal canal of mesodermal origin and urogenital sinus of endodermal origin. And now let us move on to descent of testis. So descent of testis, in this diagram we'll understand. So this is the testis, here's the mesonephric duct, and here's the peritoneal cavity, and here's the gubernaculum, which is attaching the testis to scrotum, cephenius of thigh, perineum, pubic symphysis. Actually scrotum is the most common one. Then ectopic sites may be like in thigh, cephenius, perineum, pubic symphysis. These are the ectopic sites where the gubernaculum attach. And actually gubernaculum is not contractile, it doesn't contain any muscle tissue, or it is not contractable, and it is also not moving anything, just it is having relative shortening. As these organs are increased, it appears to be shortened, and they drag mainly the MND, that is the mesonephric duct and the peritoneum, so that the testis can reach the scrotum. And the detached peritoneal cavity, as this is moving, shortening, and this is formed, the peritoneal cavity later gets detached, and it mainly leads to formation of process vaginalis. So here we are in the descent of testis, that is the tail of Lockwood. That is, this gubernaculum may attach to either scrotum, saphenous opening of the type, perineum, and also pubic symphysis. And next, let us see the gubernaculum in the case of female. In female, the proximal gubernaculum forms the ligament of ovary, and the distal gubernaculum forms a round ligament of uterus. Now let us move on to chronology of descent. So what is it? That is how the testis is present in which month. Let us see the dorsal. In the first month, the testis is present in the dorsal body wall in the lumbar region. In the third month, it is present in iliac fossa. 7th month in the deep inguinal ring. 8th month in the inguinal canal. Of course, 8th month in the and 9th month, or at the time of birth, it reaches the scrotum. So we have one anomaly like undescended testis is called cryptorchidism. So that's it, all about important points which are required from this chapter. So if you like our videos, like, share and subscribe. Today we will continue development of central nervous system. So neurulation is the process by which neural tube takes place. So it is simultaneous with the gastrulation process, which actually takes place at third week of development. So let us know the process how neural tube is formed. So first we know notochord is present between the mesoderm, that is the second layer. So the notochord gives the signal to the ectoderm. So the ectoderm forms the neural plate. So as the neural plate is formed, next actually not neural tube here. After the neural plate is formed, neural groove forms, and after the neural groove is formed, the neural tube forms. So this is all initiated by our notochord. So ectoderm gives our ectoderm, because of this notochord stimulation, it divides into surface ectoderm and also neuroectoderm. So from the part of the neural ectoderm only the neural plate forms, and it invaginates and next the neural groove forms, and next the neural tube forms. Now let us see the neural crest cells. So neural crest cells is also called as fourth germ layer. We know that our three germ layers are ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm, and also this neural crest cell is called fourth germ layer because when this neural tube is formed, at its sides small flanged structures are nothing but called as neural crest cells. So this is called as fourth germ layer, and it is also known as secondary mesenchyme. And the neural tube formation initially occurs at cervical region, and later the neural tube communicates with the amniotic cavity by means of neuropores. So there are two neuropores, cranial neuropore and caudal neuropore. So the cranial neuropore closes by 25th day, which is a remnant of the cranial neuropore is lamina terminalis, which is situated in the anterior wall of the third ventricle. And if this fails to close by 25th day, then it is called a condition called anencephaly. And caudal neuropore closes mainly by 28th day, and remnant of it is called as terminal ventricle, and it fails to close by 28th day, then it is known as rachis. Next, let us move on to neural tube defects. So it is mainly due to the deficiency of folic acid. So example, in this case we get both anencephaly and rachis. So folic acid tablets are given in the first trimester as soon as possible these days. And also the cranial part of neural tube will form some vesicles, that is cranial part of neural tube forms brain, and caudal part forms spinal cord. So the cranial part is divided into prosencephalon, mesencephalon and rhombencephalon. Prosencephalon is further divided into telencephalon, diencephalon. Telencephalon gives rise to cerebrum, cerebral hemispheres and also corpus striatum, and diencephalon gives rise to all thalamus structures, and mesencephalon gives rise to midbrain. Rhombencephalon is further divided into metencephalon, myelencephalon. Metencephalon gives rise to pons, cerebellum, and myelencephalon gives rise to medulla oblongata, and the caudal part forms the spinal cord. And also the diencephalon leads to formation of pars nervosa, that is posterior pituitary, and also it leads to formation of optic stalk, which gives rise to retina and also optic nerve. And now let us move on to ventricle. So ventricle, its cavities are mainly present inside the brain. So in telencephalon we have the lateral ventricle, in diencephalon we have the third ventricle, in midbrain we have the cerebral aqueduct of Sylvius, and in metencephalon, myelencephalon, that is in our rhombencephalon, we have our fourth ventricle. And next, coming to the source of structure. So pineal gland, it is also part of epithalamus. So of course it is from diencephalon because all thalamus parts are derived from diencephalon. Medial and lateral geniculate body, which are also part of metathalamus. So these are also from diencephalon. And substantia nigra, we know it's a black color part which is present in our midbrain. That is so it is from mesencephalon. Corpus striatum and cerebrum, we know, as we already discussed, is from telencephalon. So craniorechiasis, if you remember, it is because rechiasis is caused when 28 day the neural port, that is caudal part of neural port, is not closing, but not cranial, so not caudal part, that is cranial part of tube if it doesn't close. Yeah, not cranial, caudal part only. Caudal part of the tube, if doesn't closes on 28 days, it causes rechaschisis, right? So craniorechiaschisis is nothing but the entire neural tube is open in this case, and it is severe form of neural tube defects. So there we have seen the above the caudal neuropore if doesn't close. This is craniorechiaschisis, where entire neural port is open and it is severe form of neural tube defects.